The strange thing about dying in prison is that the walls don't change, but you do. And one morning you realize the loudest part of your life has been what you never said. My name is Raymond. I'm 72 years old, and the prison doctor told me I have about 6 months left. He didn't say it like a movie, and I didn't fall to my knees. He just looked at my chart, then looked at me the way a man looks at a clock that has stopped keeping time, and he said, "It's months, not years." I walked back to my unit holding a thin slip of paper that wasn't much bigger than a receipt, and I remember thinking how small it was for something that heavy. The corridor smelled like bleach and boiled vegetables, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and your hair until you stop noticing it. Men were talking about commissary, about sports, about whose bunk was getting searched, about all the normal things that fill up a day when you don't want your mind to wander into the places it shouldn't. In my cell, the first thing I saw was the calendar. Not the kind you hang in a kitchen with grandkids on it, just a cheap paper one I got from the chaplain's office, taped to the cinder block with corners that curl from the damp. I've kept a calendar the whole time I've been here, because time in prison is like water. If you don't cup your hands around it, it runs right through you, and you don't even realize you're thirsty. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at those little squares like they were a language I'd never learned. For years I've crossed off days without thinking. Some men count down to parole, some count down to a release date, some count down to nothing and pretend they don't. I counted down to routine, chow, yard, lights out, count time, medication line, another sunrise I didn't earn, another night I survived. And then the doctor's words landed in the middle of it, right there on a Tuesday, and all my calendars suddenly looked different. The squares weren't days anymore, they were chances. They were the last handful of times I might hear a voice I love. The last handful of times I might say something true without the room swallowing it. People on the outside think prison is all noise. Sometimes it is. Doors clanging, men shouting, TVs turned up because nobody wants to sit in silence with themselves. But the worst part, at least for me, has been the quiet I chose. A kind of quiet that feels like control until you realize it is just fear wearing a uniform. I didn't come in here as an old man. I came in with dark hair and a jaw full of stubbornness, with a chest full of anger I called pride. I told myself I was different from the men who looked beaten. I told myself I would do my time like a man, no tears, no begging, no soft words, no reaching for people who might not reach back. That is a lie I lived inside for a long time. Before prison, my life was loud in all the wrong ways. I worked with my hands. Construction, roofing, whatever kept food on the table when I was willing to show up. I married a woman who loved me hard, the kind of love that tries to pull a man out of his own darkness, and I repaid her by making my moods the weather in our house. I was the kind of father who believed providing was the same as being present. I paid bills and thought that was enough. I fixed things and thought that counted as tenderness. When my daughter wanted to talk, I listened with half an ear, like her words were background noise to my own worries. I can still see the small moments that should have been warnings. My wife standing at the sink, shoulders tight, asking me to promise I'd come home before dark, and me answering like her fear was an inconvenience. My daughter in the back seat, holding a school paper, waiting for me to turn around and look at her, and me keeping my eyes on the road because it was easier than being proud out loud. Then I made the decision that brought me here. I thought I was solving a problem fast, thought I was doing what I had to do, thought I could control the outcome like I controlled a nail with a hammer. That's what pride does. It makes you believe you can bend consequences if you grip hard enough. The day they took me away, my daughter was 16. I remember her standing in the doorway, not crying, just staring at me like she was trying to figure out if I was still her father or if I'd become a stranger right in front of her. My wife's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hold her coffee cup steady, and I said nothing useful. I didn't tell them I was sorry. I didn't tell them I was scared. I didn't tell them I loved them. I thought silence would keep me from falling apart, like if I didn't speak, the truth couldn't touch me. That was the first time my silence did real damage, and it wasn't the last. Prison trained me to make my world small. You learn quickly what to show and what to hide. You learn to keep your face steady, even when your insides are shaking. You learn to swallow news, swallow grief, swallow shame, because there's nowhere safe to put it down. I put it all on the calendar instead. I circled court dates. I circled holidays, not because they meant celebration, but because they meant the mailroom might be slower, or the unit might be tense, or the chaplain might do a service that reminded me of a life I couldn't touch anymore. I marked the days my daughter was supposed to call when she was younger and still tried. I marked them with a little dot, like a promise I didn't deserve. Some months the dot stopped. It didn't happen all at once. It's never dramatic like that. It's like a radio fading into static. At first she called and I missed it because I was at work detail. Then she called and I was in line for chow. Then she called and I was angry at something small and petty, and I let it ring because I didn't want her to hear the bitterness in my voice. Then weeks went by, then months. Then her voice became something I remembered more than something I heard. I told myself she was busy. I told myself she was fine. I told myself it was better if she moved on. Those were all comforting lies, because the truth was simpler and harder. My silence made it easy for her to stop trying. In here, you learn to live with missing things. You miss good food, you miss soft beds, you miss walking outside without permission. But the thing that hollows a man out is missing the moments you can't get back, birthdays you only hear about later, funerals you don't attend, a grandchild you've never held, a daughter's laugh that used to fill a room, now reduced to a memory you replay until it doesn't even sound real anymore. I kept crossing off days anyway because that's what I did. I woke up. I made my bunk tight. I stood for count. I ate. I waited. I watched the calendar like it was a guard tower. Then, about a month before the doctor gave me that timeline, I had my scare. It wasn't blood or sirens. It was something smaller, and it shook me more than anything loud ever did. In prison, you get your appointments and your calls posted. Not a fancy system, just a paper list on the unit board, and if your name's there, you better show up when they tell you, because you don't get second chances around here. That week, I had been waiting for a video call with my daughter. She hadn't done one in a long time. It wasn't even a sure thing, just a request that finally got approved after weeks of back and forth. When I saw my name on that list, my chest got tight in a way I couldn't explain. I went back to my cell and I circled the date on my calendar so hard the pen tore the paper. I stared at that circle every night like it was a doorway. The morning of the call, the unit was loud. A search had turned people sour. Someone's radio kept cutting out. Men were arguing over a chair like it was a throne. I told myself I would stay calm. I told myself I would be ready. I even rehearsed what I would say. Not a big speech, just simple things. I've been thinking about you. I'm sorry. I want to hear your life. I want to be your father again, even from in here. But the day dragged me the way prison always does, by the collar of routine. Count time ran late. Chow line ran long. I got pulled aside for a random pat search. Someone I knew asked me to help him write a grievance, and I did, because helping someone else feels like having a purpose, even when it's small. I kept glancing at the clock. I kept telling myself I had time. At some point, I stopped looking. It is hard to explain what it feels like to forget something you cared about in a place where you cling to any scrap of meaning. It wasn't that I didn't want it. It was like my mind slid right past it as if it were any other day. I went back to my cell and sat on my bunk, and I started watching men play cards through the bars like I'd done 1,000 times. I stared at the calendar without really seeing it. The circle was there, bold and torn, and somehow my eyes didn't translate it into urgency. I just sat, letting the noise wash over me. Then an officer walked by and called my name, not harsh, not kind, just official. "Raymond, you missed it." I stood up so fast my knees protested. "Missed what?" He looked at me like I was slow. "Your video visit." They waited 10 minutes. They're moving on. My mouth went dry. I grabbed the calendar off the wall, tape ripping, and I stared at the circle like it had betrayed me. I wanted to argue, to blame the late count, to blame the chaos, to blame anything but my own mind. But there was nothing to do. In prison, the system doesn't care what something meant to you. It cares what time it was. I walked back to the unit desk like a man walking to a funeral. My hands were trembling. The officer told me I could submit another request, that it might get scheduled again, that I should pay attention next time. He said it the way people say things when they don't realize they're speaking into a wound. Back in my cell, I sat on my bunk and held that calendar in my hands like it was a letter I couldn't read. I stared at the empty square where that call had been, and I felt something break open in me that had been locked up even longer than my body. It wasn't just the missed call. It was what the missed call meant. It meant time was not only passing, it was slipping, and I was the one letting it slip. It meant I had waited years for a chance to speak, and when it arrived I had lost it to the same numb routine that had already stolen so much of my life. That was the day I stopped pretending my silence was strength. A week later, the prison doctor gave me the timeline. I sat on the paper-covered chair in that small exam room while he talked in careful sentences. I'm not going to tell you it was one specific thing, because I don't know, and I'm not a doctor. I only know he told me my body was tired and that the way things were trending didn't leave a lot of room for bargaining. He wasn't cruel about it. He wasn't dramatic. He just spoke like a man doing his job, and then he paused, as if he was giving me a moment to understand that this job was also my life. When I got back to my cell, I taped the calendar back up, but I did it differently. I smoothed the corners. I pressed the tape down with care, like I was placing something fragile back where it belonged. Then I took the pen and I wrote my daughter's name on the top margin, right above the month, because I needed to make the reason visible. I told myself I had 6 months, but even that is not a promise. In prison, nothing is a promise. Not a call, not a visit, not even tomorrow. So I started with small steps, the kind a man in my position can actually take. I went to the unit board every morning and read it slowly, not just glancing the way I used to. I asked the officer for clarification when I needed it, even though I hated the feeling of needing anything. I wrote down my appointment times on the calendar the moment I got them. I stopped trusting my mind to hold what mattered because my mind had proven it could drop it. When the chaplain offered blank paper, I took it. I didn't know what to do with it at first. A man like me has spent a lifetime avoiding letters that require honesty. But I sat on my bunk at night with the unit lights dim and the sounds of other men settling into sleep, and I started writing to my daughter. Not a speech, not an excuse, not an attempt to rewrite the past. Just the truth in plain words. I wrote about the day I was taken away and what I should have said. I wrote about how my silence wasn't dignity, it was cowardice. I wrote about the way I used to think being a father meant paying bills and keeping a roof, and how I learned too late that children need your words, not just your work. I wrote about the missed video call and how ashamed I was that even when she tried, I failed again, not with violence this time, but with absence. I did not ask her to forgive me. I didn't deserve to demand anything. I just told her I was sorry in a way I had never told her before, without defending myself, without adding conditions, without wrapping it in pride. When I finished that first letter, I didn't feel relieved. I felt exposed. I folded it anyway, slid it into an envelope, and put it in the outgoing mail like I was placing a piece of my life into someone else's hands. Then I waited. Waiting is what prison teaches you best. You wait for doors, you wait for meals, you wait for answers, you wait for news. This time, waiting had a different weight, because I wasn't waiting to be spared. I was waiting to be heard. A couple weeks later, my name showed up on the board again for a video call. I circled the date on my calendar, but this time I also wrote the time in big numbers, and I asked a man in my unit to remind me, because pride is a luxury I can't afford anymore. When the day came, I sat near the desk an hour early. I didn't care how it looked. I didn't care if anyone thought I was desperate. I was. They led me into the little room with the screen and the chair bolted to the floor. The officer set it up, told me to keep it appropriate, and stepped back. The screen flickered, then her face appeared, older than the last time I'd seen her in person, more tired around the eyes. For a second she just looked at me, like she was checking if I was real. I opened my mouth and my throat tightened. She said my name the way you say something you haven't said in years. Dad. That one word rearranged my insides. I wanted to apologize immediately. I wanted to tell her about the doctor. I wanted to give her everything at once, to empty myself out so I wouldn't die with it still inside. But I remembered something I had written in my letter. I have spent a lifetime making my feelings the center of the room. If I have any decency left, I can let her have space. So I said, thank you for being here. Her eyes shifted, like she wasn't expecting gratitude, like she was bracing for anger or guilt. We sat in a quiet that wasn't hostile, just careful. Then she asked about my health, not kindly, not cruelly, just the way adults ask when they already suspect the answer. I told her what I could without turning it into a threat. I told her the doctor had given me a timeline, that it wasn't long, that I didn't want to scare her, but I didn't want to lie anymore either. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together, and I could see her trying to decide what she owed me. And then she said, the line that has stayed with me since, the line I hear at night when the unit goes quiet. She said, I waited a long time for you to talk to me like this. Not I missed you, not I love you, not I forgive you. Just that, a simple truth, sharp as a blade and gentle as a hand at the same time. I nodded because anything else would have been an excuse. We talked about small things after that. Her job, the weather where she lives, the fact that she doesn't like the town she's in, but she's making it work. She told me she has a son now, my grandson, and she held up a photo to the camera, a little boy with her eyes. I stared at that image and felt grief and joy collide in my chest because I was seeing a life I had not earned access to. I didn't ask to meet him on camera. I didn't ask her to bring him into this. I told her he was beautiful, and I told her I was proud of her because that is the kind of sentence I used to swallow, and I don't have time for swallowing anymore. When the call ended, the screen went black, and I sat there for a second in the sudden silence, hearing my own breathing, feeling the way a room can hold the weight of something that mattered. Back in my cell, I looked at the calendar again. The squares were still small, the walls were still grey, the noises were still the same. But my relationship with the days had changed. They were no longer something to endure. They were something to use. I kept writing letters. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. That was the price of what I'd done, and I accepted it. I started going to the chapel even when I didn't feel holy, because the chapel was one of the few places where a man could sit without pretending. I spoke with the counselor the prison offers, not because I thought it would fix me, but because I needed a witness to the truth, someone who would not let me slide back into the old habit of silence. And I made one more small decision that surprised me. I started telling the truth in ordinary moments. If I was sad, I said I was sad. If I missed my family, I said it plainly. If a man asked me how I was doing, I stopped answering with the prison version of fine. That did not make me soft. It made me real. It made me real. Here is what I have learned in this bunk, with my calendar curling at the edges and my days getting counted down, not by a judge, but by my own body. Silence does not erase the past. Silence preserves it. D's. Silence is a way of keeping the same mistakes alive, generation after generation, because nobody ever names them. I used to think my life was ruined by what I did. Now I see it was also ruined by what I refused to say afterward. I cannot undo the harm. I cannot go back and become the father my daughter needed at 16. I cannot give my wife the marriage she deserved. I cannot give my grandson a grandfather who can take him to a park or teach him how to hold a hammer the right way. But I can stop repeating the old pattern the only way I still can. I can stop hiding. I can stop using silence as a shield. I can speak while I still have breath. I can tell the truth without demanding forgiveness as payment. The doctor gave me months, but he also gave me clarity. In here, freedom is not a place. It is not a gate. It is not a release date. For me, freedom is choosing what kind of man I am in the last stretch of my life, and choosing to give my family something honest instead of leaving them with more unanswered questions. If you are listening to me from a kitchen table, from a car, from a living room, from any place where you can walk outside without asking, I want you to understand this without fear and without drama. You do not need a prison bunk to learn what silence costs. Look at the people you love and notice the words you keep swallowing. Notice the apologies you keep postponing until the timing feels perfect. Notice the gratitude you assume is understood. The calendar on my wall is teaching me that perfect timing is a story we tell ourselves so we can stay comfortable, and comfort is not the same as peace. I have 6 months left, maybe less, and I will probably die in this bunk. That part is ugly and plain, but the part that still belongs to me is what I do with the days between now and then. So I'm saying it as cleanly as I can, the way I wish I had learned to speak sooner. If there is something true you have been withholding, because you are proud, because you are scared, because you don't want to feel exposed, stop practicing that silence. It does not protect you. It teaches the people around you how to live without you. Choose one square on your own calendar, just one, and use it to say what you have been meaning to say, not as a performance, not as a grand gesture, just as a human being making contact. I spent years believing my punishment was the sentence. Now I know my deepest punishment would have been leaving this world without finally speaking. I don't want that for you.